So a couple of months ago I made this numpad for my expense tracking stuff, which was also my first attempt at making a hand-wired per key RGB keyboard. It was okay for a while until I noticed that the key placements was a bit too hard to reach, so when I looked back at my other column stagger keyboards, I found out that the column stagger was too high, which meant it was a good time for me to revisit the numpad and revise the layout. This is a video of the many nights that I had to go through to get the V2 of this keyboard made. First, of course, was to modify the layout, which was a simple move of the columns to go down a bit and also some keys here and there. There was the part of making the keyboard to have an enclosed case with slots for underglow RGBs. I didn't have this in the original numpad, so might as well add them. After that's done, I made the firmware to add extra underglow LEDs, thinking that I can control them independently from the RGB matrix, but turns out QMK doesn't allow for that, so I probably took another 2 days working on the firmware. After that was printing the case and start building the thing. First off was soldering the per key RGB LEDs. I use SK6812 Mini E LEDs for this, and I weave a 0.5mm copper wire into holes to connect the ground and power for the LEDs. The reason why I use this weaving method is because it removes the need for me to hold the wires in place when soldering them to the LED legs. After the weaving is done, I slotted in the column wires, which wasn't as easy since the wire was too flimsy. And after that, I made a switch plate to cover the exposed power and ground LED wires. I'm kind of proud I made these slots to cover them while still being able to have a switch plate that can hold the switches. After that, I soldered the LEDs to the wires. This wasn't easy, to be honest, since I need to hold the solder iron in place for a few seconds to make the solder stick to the copper wire and the LED legs, and this while trying not to melt the LED module or melting the case, which can cause the legs to be sunk in. Next was to solder the D in and D out connections for the LEDs. Then I worked on the underglow LEDs for the bottom case. I made some routing parts for the wires so I can use the weaving method I use for the per key RGB LEDs. So this is when I connected the first V1 numpad to the V2 RGB lights to see if it works. And this is when I connected both top and bottom LEDs to confirm the connections. The bottom LEDs had some connection issues, but nothing that can't be fixed later. Now for the hot swap sockets. Then the diodes. I used this diode leg bender I printed off an STL on the internet, which was super convenient to make sure I have the correct bends for all the diodes. And then this was when the build went to shit. Now, it turns out the diode holes that I made were too narrow by like 0.3mm, which didn't allow the diodes to sit in properly, which would mean the switches couldn't be fully pushed in. When I tried to force the diodes in, the diode would crack. And that meant current would flow freely on that switch. And I couldn't remove the cracked diodes from the case, which meant I needed to go back to my design and add that stupid offset so there's more clearance for the diode to sit in. So after 2 nights, a second revision and a second print, all the diodes sit in flush. I figured I'd solder the sockets first, then do the LEDs. Now, I didn't record this, but after doing the sockets and going on to the LEDs, I got stuck at getting the first and second row LEDs to work. And I eventually gave up on that build and made a third revision with a few changes like opting for a column router since I was running out of 0.5mm copper wires and had a bunch of 1.2mm wire lying around. And while building the third time, I figured out why the LEDs didn't work on my second build. Turns out my soldering iron was cranked up to 350 to 400 degrees Celsius, and that probably killed the LED or made them faulty. So I turned the temperature down to 250 and did the whole build again. And at this time it was probably entering my 4th week working on this on late nights because that's the only time I have for myself away from my kids. So 3rd time's a charm and the LEDs work, with a lot of tweaking here and there of course. Did some testing for the switches before hooking this up to the bottom case. You know, one thing that almost made me want to throw this build to the wall was when I tried putting in the trackpad. Turns out the print that I had a vertical length of 40.3 millimeters for the trackpad, but I actually needed another 0.15 millimeter to have it fit in. I tried doing that in Fusion, but it just won't allow me to offset the face, so in the end I just took a file and filed off the surface just enough so I can cram the trackpad in. And the last thing that pissed me off at 1 AM in the morning making this thing was when I tried to close the case. Now mind you, this was at like 95% of completion of the thing, okay? Every time I tightened the screw, an underglow LED would go off or go haywire. At one point all the LEDs didn't turn on, and turns out there were two reasons. The first being the underglow copper wires were shorting with the wires above, so for this I just taped some cellophane tape on the wires for insulation and they just worked. And the second reason was kind of stupid because I accidentally turned off the LEDs because I mapped the LED on-off key on the key map, which I accidentally pressed when screwing the top and bottom halves together, and it took me about half an hour figuring that one out. So anyway, everything's done, wires are done, clearances are good, and after about 4 weeks of pain and many sleepless nights working on this thing, getting scolded by my wife for not taking care of the kids, may I present you nampek version 2. This is the 14 key numpad with this key map over here, because I just use this for my expenses entry every now and then. I'm usually broke, but I try to be responsibly broke by tracking whatever I use my money on. So yeah, so this is my numpad. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I put some links down below if you're interested in the switches I use, which are the Kale summer switches. So clicky, much noisy. Okay, that's all. Thanks for watching. ご視聴ありがとうございました。